Today we're talking about Daji. While this is a guard guide, we'll approach things a little differently from what I usually do. We will talk about the ability order and the items that you should build later on, but with Daji I think it's very important to talk about how her kit functions, what her strength and what her weaknesses are beforehand to understand how to play her properly or why certain things are prioritized over others in most cases. Additionally, I will show you some combos and some tricks that will work for this character as well. Let's begin with her strength and weaknesses. Daji's biggest strength without a doubt is her high single target damage, at least in a theoretical sense. If you can apply all her abilities in a perfect combo, she has ridiculous amounts of damage, but that also includes the enemy not being very mobile and the enemy not being able to somehow prevent any of your dot damage. Her second big strength is conditionally strong crowd control. The emphasis here has to be on conditionally because it only applies in certain situations, or rather it is all in her ultimate and in her chains. The CC is very potent. It's a pull and a stun, and it can hit up to 3 people, but then again this is a big if. Originally I was thinking of putting her escape potential towards the cons of this character, because really one of her escapes requires her to have allies around and the other one is very easy to interrupt. But there are some tricks that can make her escape potential better that we'll talk about, so I would say she has average escape capabilities overall. They are just very conditional, like everything else about her. And now the downsides. She generally has a very low crowd control because the only crowd control, as we said, is in her ultimate. Nothing else in her kit has any CC on it, and that is a big downside. She has a very low multi-target damage. Almost all her damage is single target. Yes, you can hit multiple targets with the 2, but primarily you will use your 1 for damage and your 3, and those are almost only single target as the radius is very small. Another downside is that a significant amount of her damage comes through dots. Why this is an issue is something we will address in just a moment. Her last very obvious downside is that her abilities are very delayed and easy to interrupt. Both her 3 and her ultimate have a long delay. In one case it's the teleport itself, in another case it's hitting a single chain. Whereas the 2 can be erupted by pretty much any sort of hot CC, and while that's true for many abilities, in this case it takes away a lot of escape potential and a lot of damage from the ability. I actually realized that this is worth an individual point as well, so I'm gonna add this here. Her attack chain is extremely clunky and very awkward, and that's something you have to get used to. You will usually just land the first hit and then try to attack cancel to something else, because hitting more than 1 hit on her is just slightly annoying. Now let's get back to the dots, the damage over time real quick, and let's talk about why this is a problem. She has a lot of damage through her bleed and her passive. Pretty much every hit that she lands will make the enemy bleed, making them take damage over time. As this applies for not only her basic attacks but also her abilities, the damage of the abilities generally is towards a little bit of the lower side, as for all abilities the dot damage is kind of factored in. If she had the same damage values as other characters, she'd probably be a little too strong. But if you put all the damage into dots, you're gonna have an issue. There are ways in Smite to negate dots. For example, there's Aegis, which counters dots. There are heals that will just heal you up before the dot has gone completely through, and if you would have otherwise been dead, then this matters a lot. And there are some other more specific means like immunities and so on. So the same damage taken as a dot or instantly is not the same, even though the values may be the same, which is why most players prefer Deathbringer over Malice as well. It's simply a lot safer if the damage has already come off, especially when it kills them and prevents them from using any form of immunity in the first place. Additionally, bleed damage means that the enemy can still damage you while they slowly bleed out. That means that even if they will eventually die, they will have dealt significantly higher amounts of damage to you. Most guards are able to land an extra 1 to 2 abilities in the 2 seconds that the bleed ticks, or the dot from the 1 ticks, or whichever you want to look at. And this means that Daji has to be a little more survivable than others in order to reach full effectiveness, because if she can't take the damage after dealing her damage and the enemy is about to die, then it's not unlikely that she will go down with him. Now that we know where she stands, let's talk about Daji's abilities. Torture Blades is a dot, as pointed out beforehand. This deals a certain amount of base damage, 7 per tick, and then a 10% scaling, which is quite a lot of extra damage, especially a lot of extra scaling, as this applies to both basics and abilities. Her 1 is Horrible Burns, a dot with an initial high base damage that ticks for a lot of damage afterwards and has a relatively short cooldown. Her 2 is 1000 Cuts, a 4-hit chain that also increases her movement speed quite drastically and takes away any strafing penalty while making her immune to slows, and also giving her additional damage mitigation, with every single hit of this ability applying the bleed. Her 3 is Trickster Spirit, a teleport that will allow you to teleport to a target after a short time and deal some damage to them if they're an enemy. This teleport can go both to enemies as well as allies, and as such can sometimes be used as an escape tool as well. This ability goes over walls, so you can use it to follow an enemy through a wall or see if a camp is up somewhere by trying to teleport to it. Her ultimate is Pao Lao, an ability that allows her to become CC immune for a moment, go up into the air, become untargetable, and then shoot 3 chains from being in air. The ability cannot be cancelled before it runs out, and as soon as it runs out, all enemies that have been hit by the chains will be pulled towards Daji's totem, and she can choose where she lands. If a target gets pulled, they take a high amount of damage and get stunned for a moment. However, it's very easy to cancel the chains on you because you don't have to cancel them with beats when you're being pulled, but are free to use beats at any point to remove them. Now let's look into some of the core mechanics of Daji. First of all, she has a very strong basic attack cancel via her 1. What does that mean? You use the basic attack first and then use the one right after, and you will basically have a free hit with no delay in between and get 2 hits off in a very short time frame. This is very essential to how you play this character, so you should practice it a little bit. This can easily be combined with a 3. If you teleport to a target, then you can drop a basic attack and your 1 right after. This is pretty much the ideal quick initiation combo that you can use with her. Well, I said they could be easily combined, but there's a bit of an issue with that. While the 3 should usually land you next to the target, that doesn't exactly always happen, and you will see some examples in the background. If the enemy has no to very little movement speed, then yes, you will land next to the enemy. But the more movement speed the enemy has, the harder it will become. If the enemy has 3 movement speed items, boots and 2 additional normal movement speed items, then it's pretty much impossible to even land the first basic attack after the teleport, because if they keep walking, they will already be out of range. If they're using a dash, the same thing can easily happen. There is counterplay to that. By turning yourself before the teleport, you will be placed facing in the direction towards the enemy that you decided to turn yourself in. So if you turn by 180 degrees and you were behind the enemy, you will land right in front of the enemy and body block them. You can abuse that because that's the best way to actually get in their way, block whichever escape they have as long as it's possible and you don't get knocked up by it or something, and that way apply your basic attacks. Note that this, due to the delay, sometimes will make you end up in very weird places very unexpectedly, especially if the enemy moves in a direction that you didn't expect them to go in, and if the enemy changes direction, the body blocking becomes a lot harder. It is possible, but the delay of the ability, plus the normal server ping, plus the fact that it doesn't have any soft or hard CC at all to keep the enemy in place until you teleport it, means that in normal matches you will frequently end up not where you're supposed to and not close enough to the enemy to hit them regardless of if you turn around or not. At the same time, the 3 is your best engage tool most of the time, so it's something you just have to get used to, you just have to expect. In this context, I quickly want to show you the best combo that you can pull off with Daji on paper. So it's teleporting in with a 3, using a basic attack cancelling into the 1, then using another basic attack ideally, attack cancelling into the 2, using the whole 2, maybe another basic attack after, not that important, use the ultimate, chain 1 target 3 times, that's the maximum amount of damage you can get on 1 target, land right next to the target when you come down, hit them with another basic and cancel into another basic. With this combo you will deal a ridiculous amount of damage, but it will almost never happen. In most cases, you will either get CC'd out of your combo at an earlier point, either at the 3 or at the 2, or the enemy will somehow get some distance to you, or the enemy will be able to avoid at least some of the chains, or they will be able to get CC immunity against the chains. As we're already talking about the chains, here's a neat trick that you can do with the ultimate. Now, Daji's escapes, as I said earlier on, are not that good. Her 2 is easily interrupted and her 3 depends on you having an ally nearby. Both escapes kinda not ideal in many situations. However, there is a trick you can do with her to get an excellent escape range if you play it right. This trick requires you to use your ultimate, but many gods actually use their ultimate to escape in a fight if things go badly. Think for example Thor, Ratatoskr or Camazotz. With Daji, what you can do is use the ultimate, which comes up relatively quickly, so you will probably survive going up into your ult, and not chain anyone at all. What you can do now is wait out the duration of the totem, ideally without indicating which direction you're going to jump down in, and then turn around in the direction you want to jump in, and use blink right away. There's pretty much no chance for an enemy to catch you in that split second, and it'll give you a massive amount of distance to the enemies very, very quickly. I can't actually think of any ability that will give you the same distance as this combo. This is beneficial because blink is generally a good relic for her in my opinion, simply due to the fact that it allows you to escape more in general or give you great engages with your ultimate without having to sacrifice your other escape or mobility tools. Note that this doesn't work if you were to pull someone, because in that case the enemy will get pulled towards you and the dot will start before you even land, so you're in combat again. Before we get into the leveling order, let's quickly talk about 1000 cuts, her 2. Her 2 is actually, which may surprise you, her weakest ability when it comes to dealing damage, and better off being used as her main escape tool. This is down to the fact that Trickster Spirit just doesn't work very well as an escape because it relies on your teammates being around you, etc., and it has a longer delay. And also the fact that 1000 cuts gives you that damage mitigation, high movement speed, so good ways of getting away from an enemy and being turned away from them at the same time so you take less damage. But on top of that, the damage swings of 1000 cuts are actually relatively weak, especially towards late game. You actually deal more damage by using your basic attacks overall because they have better scalings, etc. While Horrible Burns only gives you 60 extra damage per rank, it's a lot more reliable damage, and because of the much shorter cooldown you can use it a lot more often than the extra 80 damage from 1000 cuts. 1000 cuts can be easily interrupted, and then you don't get any of that extra damage, or maybe you get 20 instead. The bleed stacks, which make a significant portion of 1000 cuts damage, will also always apply no matter which rank the ability is on. So prioritizing Horrible Burns over 1000 cuts and even Trickster Spirits over it usually makes a lot of sense. At the same time, 1000 cuts is your best tool whenever it comes to hitting multiple targets, and this is especially important for early lane clear and for early jungle camp clear. What I would recommend is putting 3 points into 1000 cuts. In most situations, this will be sufficient in order to clear the small minions of a camp or the majority of a wave, especially the archers if you're going for those. And then you can, especially in the camp situation, clear those up with Horrible Burns, the big camp, and you will have sufficient damage that way. And if you max out Horrible Burns earlier, your gank potential will be much scarier. By putting 3 points into 1000 cuts, you will not end up in the Arachne Bakasura category, where you have a real issue clearing the smalls of a camp, but you will still be able to have more of an impact early on. That all explains the leveling order. Prioritizing the ultimate is actually very important with her because the extra damage per rank of the ult is 190 damage per target, so up to 3 targets, which is in my opinion a pretty ridiculous amount. So even though the ult is clunky and slow and laggy, if you just hit a single shot with that, this damage increase will be drastic. The second priority should be Horrible Burns later on in the game, after you have those 3 points and 1000 cuts. 1000 cuts should be prioritized early on for clear, and Trickster Spirit just should be there for your mobility and escape potential. You can consider on the early levels to go Horrible Burns on the second level if you think you really don't need your escape, you want to go really aggressive. You can also put a point in Horrible Burns on level 3. I just prefer to have 1000 cuts there when possible, because I feel like her early aggression is not the greatest anyways, and you just want to focus on quick clear, and for that 1000 cuts and Trickster Spirit are simply better, and Trickster Spirit can actually be used for clearing as well. But again, this is a bit of a preference thing. As long as you prioritize a second point into 1000 cuts before level 5, you should be fine, and then another one after you level the ultimate, and then shift over to Horrible Burns. It's also completely reasonable to prioritize 1000 cuts over Trickster Spirit in a match where you feel like you're not gonna get interrupted out of your 1000 cuts too much, and you can go in very aggressive, maybe when you're snowballing into your head. In that situations, the extra 80 potential damage may pay off more than the extra 40 damage that may or may not happen and are on a longer cooldown. So this is a bit of preference, a bit of situational decision here, but your main focus should be Horrible Burns and Pao Lao either way. When it comes to building Daji, there are many options, very flexible. I will generally say what you want to have on her is some high power items. That's just core on her because all her abilities scale very well and her passive scales very well. You want to have some penetration for sure, both flat penetration and percentage penetration, so Titan's Bane is pretty much core on her. You want to have some CDR if possible, some cooldown reduction is always great for an ability-based assassin, and you probably want some defenses as well. I do believe that especially Shifter's Shield is great for her. It gives a lot of power, but also a lot of defenses that act really well with her damage mitigation she has later on. But even items like Spirit Rope should be very strong on her, simply because her escape tools are not as great as others in most situations, and you kinda have to play around that by being a little more tanky. I have been asked multiple times if you should build attack speed on her. I would definitely say no. This is down to the fact that her attack chain is super clunky and the second hit is super delayed, plus she doesn't have too many means of sticking to the enemy for an extended period of time in order to keep fighting them, which would force you into things like haste and fatalis, which is super expensive now and really not beneficial, or you'd have to go frostbound and then it would be a frostbound runeforge combo and blah blah blah, but that's all very outlier case, especially because she doesn't work too well with runeforge either, with having no soft CC in her kit. Due to her in and out kit, she makes more use of certain items that other gods don't like as much. For example, Bloodforge is actually not too bad on her, because if you get that one single target kill, you can kind of snowball from there. Or Masamune, which allows you to go into a bigger group of enemies, still have a lot of power on that. Like all these items that I would usually not recommend all too much. While I originally rejected the idea of crit, I can see it work on her in a similar fashion as it works on Nemesis. You just have to attack cancel really quickly while having a high amount of crit, and this can definitely work. It's just something you have to make work. To just give you a very core standard build that you can use: Bluestone, Bamba's Mask, Warrior Tabi, Shifter's Shield, Jolton's Wrath, Titan's Bane, Spirit Rope, and a situational, which could for example be Malice if you want to go for crit. A little bonus info that I wanted to add towards the end of this video, thanks to AdHit who pointed this out on Twitter. You can actually cancel the animation of the 2 after the 4th swing. Usually it would take quite a while for Daji to come out of her 2 and basically go back to her normal attack animation. There's quite a significant delay. But if you right click cancel right after the last swing, you can go directly back into your normal basic attack chain. I hope this gives you a good overview of how Daji can be used effectively. I still think she needs some fixes or some adjustments, especially to the delay on her 3 and ultimate. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this and it was helpful for you, I would very much appreciate if you click that sub button and maybe the bell. It really helps me out. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.